Okay, good afternoon or good evening. I declare a quorum. I'm going to call the City of Groton public hearing for Tuesday, September 4th, 2018. You need me to wait?
Okay, here we are.
Okay, good evening. I'm going to declare a quorum. I'm calling the City of Groton public hearing for Tuesday, September 4th, 2018 to order. Clerk Patrick, please call the roll.
Present are Mayor Keith Hedrick, Deputy Mayor Lawrence Garish, Councilors Joe Rusk, Stephen Sheffield, Guinevere Depot, Rashad Carter, Clerk Deborah Patrick. Excused are Councilor Jamal Beckford and Finance Director Ron Newhouse. And I'm going to go switch the camera.
Okay. Once the camera's switched, then we'll do the presentation. Don't forget to speak into the mics. They're directional microphones. So make sure you're speaking into them. It does help, though, that we have the air conditioning secured. Okay, we'll start off with a presentation by the city planner. Dennis, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, good evening. My name is Dennis Godair, city planner, and I've prepared a brief presentation. It's a little bit more detail than what I spoke with you about at last week's meeting, but briefly give you a little bit of an overview of what TIF, or tax increment financing, is, elements that's within the policy for establishing a TIF district, general idea of how we may be applying TIF within the city, and then some next steps. But at its basis, tax increment financing is about promoting and supporting economic development in key locations, primarily in what we classify as underutilized areas, basically areas that would not support projects if it didn't have this type of a mechanism. It leverages the anticipated increased assessments that is above a baseline, and I'll talk about that in a moment on how you establish that baseline for the assessment. In general, the funds can be used for a broad spectrum of items, from public infrastructure to public-private partnerships, to promote development, to facade improvement programs, land purchasing, remediation, personnel costs, if there was ever a bid, business improvement district, right down to various programs to support and train businesses for economic development. Not all of the incremental revenues must be applied to the district. Some of it can go into the general fund, and that's discussed in the policy, and I'll get into the details on that in a little bit in a moment. But there must be a separate fund established for a TIF, for each TIF district, if you have more than one, for a tracking and management purposes. Probably the one biggest caveat from the legal standpoint under the state law is that the sum of all districts cannot exceed 10% of the total grand list, and that includes not just in the city, but that's also in the town as well. So it's the town and city. As you probably are aware, the town is pursuing 3 districts at the moment. What TIF is not, it is not a new tax or a special assessment. The same tax rate applies within the district as it would outside the district or somewhere else within the city. Generally, what you hope happens is that taxes within the district do increase quicker than in other areas because you're reinvesting in there. And that's what you want, is to promote your own reinvestment, but also reinvestment by property owners. Elements of the city's TIF policy. There are copies up front if anybody needs another one, but it generally establishes the framework for how you plan a TIF district, how you go about adopting it, and then how you implement the policies once it's adopted, and how it's also managed. There's various financial mechanisms and criteria that I'll explain in a moment, but some of the benefits of having a TIF policy is that it manages the risk of the community, as well as creates consistency between districts, not just within the city, but also within the town. And the TIF policy that is here is very similar to the policy that the town has adopted, and that they're utilizing to move forward with in the next few months for their first TIF district. There's various elements within the policy, the purpose, the requirements for developing a master plan, different financing mechanisms, as well as amendment procedures to either amend the policy or amend the district master plan, which is basically the same as adopting a master plan, going through the public hearing process as well. To highlight the purpose, which establishes the need and the usefulness of the policy, specifically it states the need to grow and diversify the city's tax base, to grow and support stable employment for city residents, and to improve quality of life. And it lists generally some project types and programs that the funds could be used for, such as infrastructure, housing, transportation, specifically bike and pedestrian amenities has been identified, assisting established businesses, as well as revitalizing properties or areas that are in need. The policy also defines what is within a district master plan, and a master plan is not per se lovely architectural renderings and site plans. It's a verbal explanation of what is within and what can be and should be done within the district. There are two types of master plans for the city policy, and this is where it varies between the city and the town. There's a city-only master plan. If you were to move forward with a city-only plan, you would only realize the increased revenue of the tax increments on the city portion of the tax. If it's a joint master plan, where both the city and the town participate, then you realize the full increment based upon the full assessment. And the city only requires only city approval of the master plan. A joint master plan requires both town and city approval. The district plan identifies where the boundaries are in the legal descriptions. You had saw a draft a couple of months back of two of the districts. It certifies the original assessed value, and the original assessed value is a very important element because it identifies what the overall assessment value within that district is, and it's from there that all increments moving forward is based upon, and those increments are over a 30-year period. While state law allows you to adopt a district for 50 years, the town and the city has decided for 30 years because 50 years is so far out, it's kind of hard and intangible in some respects to understand what it could be. But 30 years was enough to start to see change in benefits. It also identifies the public and private projects and programs that could be funded. You do need to be specific with how you list them here. If it's not listed within a district plan, then it's not a type of project that can be funded by the TIF district. And also the management and operations on a daily and annual basis. The financial plan, as I explain the OAV, or the original assessed value, the maximum assessment captured within the district was identified in the policy as being 50% of that increment, but you can go up to 100%. So there's flexibility in there, but 50% was identified as being a starting point and a target point. How the funds are established and managed. It also estimates the future assessed value in 30 years above the OAV. And there's no hard and fast rule on how you estimate that future value, but you look back at the last 5 to 7 years, as well as making some professional educated assumptions as to how future reinvestment within that district can be applied and how it would benefit the increment. And then the financial plan also outlines the various ways to finance and fund public-private partnerships. And I do want to just make a note that on the future assessed value, you can use that to actually borrow against. If you decided to bond, that would be an element or another mechanism. And then there's statutory requirements, just record keeping and those types of documents that were used for the adoption of the master plan. And adoption of the master plan does require a public hearing process. I'll explain a little bit more in the future. There's basically 4 financing options under the policy. The first is called the Credit Enhancement Agreement, which is primarily used for public-private partnerships. Under a credit enhancement agreement, you reimburse the developer a percentage of the realized increment. And this is the preferred way to fund a public-private partnership rather than other methods. It's the least risky. The revenue bonds, which I'm sure you are familiar with, can be used for funding public and private partnerships. Property tax abatement, which you don't need to have a TIF district for. You can do a tax abatement anywhere in the city under state law. Fixed assessment agreements, which is a predictable way for investors to understand what their cash flow is going to be for up to a maximum of 15 years. So you can negotiate an agreed assessment for a property which might be higher than what you would pay today, but lower than what you might pay 15 years from now. The intent that it balances out for everybody. And then you can use just cash, just withdrawing funds from the district fund. I'm going to talk in more detail about the CEAs because the policy talks in detail on it, and it is the preferred mechanism for private development or supporting private development. I explain that it reimburses the increment after you pay the tax, so property owner has to pay the city, town, the tax. Once it's received, then it's reimbursed at a later date. So you have to, for good faith, you have to have the money in order to get the money back. Just like the increment overall of capturing in the district, the starting point is reimbursing 50% of that tax increment, although it does remain in the policy that the city can go up to 100%, but only if it clearly benefits the city and the district. It is the least riskiest because you're still receiving money and you're guaranteed to get money and you're paying it back. There is flexibility in the policy to negotiate the terms on a case-by-case basis. You cannot use the CEA, or actually under a CEA, you cannot take advantage of the enterprise zone reduced assessment, and you cannot use other city or town benefits, such as we have a small grant program for small businesses that may not be able to be used, as well as another benefit that the town has to fund public infrastructure projects. And again, the CEAs are only used when there's a clear direct benefit to the city and when there is a need, and the need is to help offset infrastructure costs. There's absolutely no other funding opportunity that a developer can take advantage of, and it is used to fill the gap. And it can't just go to any developer. There is certainly some criteria. The applicant must have the financial capacity and be worthy. The project must cost a minimum of $1 million, excluding land costs, and the applicant must contribute 10% of the equity into the project costs. And again, all other fundings and sources and incentives must have been excluded or pursued. So how do we use it in the city? Again, it's to attract private investment. In fact, in some respects, when it comes to the private promoting private development, the city can become a partner, if you will, for lack of a better way to describe it. Support public infrastructure and assist the Economic Development Commission with their efforts, as well as them being the district advisory committee. And some of the elements or items that the Economic Development Commission is focusing on is beautification initiatives, outreach and support to existing businesses, and promoting new businesses within the city. So funds from a TIF district can be used to offset any costs associated with those efforts. And just generally speaking, there's two locations that is being explored. The Thames Bridge Street corridor, which is highlighted in green, from Eastern Point Road all the way up to roughly the I-95 interchange, and then the Five Corners District, highlighted in red. The boundaries are approved during the master plan adoption, so tonight would not be any approval of any boundaries to any district. That would come at a later date. And the sampling of who else is doing it in the state of Connecticut, as I mentioned, the town of Groton, Windsor, they've actually successfully converted a 250,000 square foot vacant mill into 160 residential units next to a rail station, downtown New Britain, Canton, Suffield, and East Hampton. So on various scales of communities. And there's, I think, dozens of others that are probably in the same state that we are right now. So next steps, refine the district boundaries, work to develop the master plan, and then begin the adoption process. There is a 90-day referral to the Planning and Zoning Commission. So once the master plan has been developed, it must go to the Planning and Zoning Commission for roughly 3 months before a public hearing can open. And from now, and if the policy is approved tonight, we're probably talking about at least 6 months approximately to start a public hearing for the first district or both. It might be more like 8 or 9. These things can take some time. So, and with that, I will open up for questions.
Councilor Sheffield.
Dennis, thank you for your presentation. First question, when we speak of the original assessed value, we're looking at the original tax assessment before you start the project, and then as the increase of once the renovation, the project begins, then when it's done, I guess the difference will be that increment from the beginning of the assessed value to what it would be at the completion?
Yeah, the original assessed value, I believe it's October. It's the value of the assessment as of October 1st, prior to when you are in the process of adopting, and then it stays. That original stays there for the 30 years, and that's what everything is based upon. If my understanding that if you're looking at, let's say, the CEA, the Credit Enhancement Agreement, if you have a property that was vacant, heard very little improvements, and a development goes onto that, and let's say they're paying $100,000 a year in taxes under the OAV, and that could literally shoot up to maybe $500,000 in property taxes because you have such a little improvement, such a little value on that land, then suddenly that increment is substantial.
Councilor Rusk.
Thank you for your presentation. My only question is, we talked a lot about the benefits. Are there any risks to the city and any risks to the residents of the city?
Well, I think the risks come in on the side of that there may not be any increased value, which is not what we hope for under a TIF district. So, there may be years that you don't have that, but you're hoping for the sake of the success of the district that there will be. That's probably the one of them. I think we need to be very careful with any agreements that we would enter into if we were to select to enter any public-private partnerships. And I think that's one of the reasons there's a lot of flexibility in here, is to allow councils, legal counsel to assist in negotiating that, and it being on a case-by-case basis. Every project in need is going to be unique. I say those would be the two biggest risks.
Thank you.
Councilor Sheffield.
Yeah, Dennis, I guess would depend the risk as far as how much investment public money, which would be the city, compared to how much private money goes into a specific project, I guess would be the risk factor. If obviously we get, let's say, an 80-20, 80% private, 20% public money, we would certainly, it'd be less risk for the city, I guess, depending on the balance.
I think that's correct, and many of these items in the policy are clear that you really need to assess the benefit that the city will be getting. So the benefit, the residents, the businesses, just the quality of life as well. So yes, whether it's an 80-20 or a 50-50, or there's that scale that has the order of magnitude of risk as well.
Any other Councilor Carter.
So, so say I'm an investor, I wanna put $2 or $3 million into a project, you know, in an area in southeastern Connecticut, right? How do I know the incentives that we have at Groton City, or in the town rather, the city, as opposed to say Ledger or somewhere else? And how do you publicize something like that?
It's a good question, and getting the word out in marketing could be always a challenge. I know for us right now, one of the initiatives that I'm working on, along with Sierra Patrick, our economic development specialist, who will be going full-time in November, is to update our website to make sure that it is up to date. And she's going to be beginning on a business outreach program. The priority is for existing businesses within the community. But the other priority will soon be promoting the city outside, going to trade shows if it's appropriate, going to events where developers might be, and other organizations, to let them know who we are, and identifying them and having material to leave behind, so people know what we have. And it's the biggest. It's just like in business. It's word of mouth. It's getting out there, meeting people, and being active and rather than passive.
Any other questions or comments from the council? Councilor Sheffield.
As far as developers, how many developers would be, I guess, involved in something of this magnitude? Would we look for just one developer to take care of the entire district, or would it be multiple developers to where there'd be probably separate contracts?
It'd be multiple,
Okay.
Unless a developer was to buy all the properties, on the district.
I wasn't sure.
Yeah, no, but the intent is that it would be multiple, and to be careful and wise in selecting how anxious or how quickly we are to enter into an agreement, so it's balanced with potential future developers as well.
Anything else? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
The next part of this public hearing is public comment. It's to solicit input on a proposed resolution to adopt the City of Groton Tax Increment Financing TIF policy from the electors of the City of Groton, all others qualified to vote. The public comment is a portion of the meeting where the council welcomes comments from the citizens. If you want to speak, please sign the sheet on the table at the front of the meeting room. When you're recognized by the mayor, please approach the podium. Clearly state your name and address and speak into the microphone. Each presentation should be limited to 5 minutes or less, and citizens should, if possible, submit written comments. And the presentation should be related to matters pertinent to the tax increment financing policy. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak regarding the tax increment financing policy?
Could I ask a question about the policy? It's nothing.
Well, you
nothing
need.
that's going to hurt you. It's just.
Well, you need to. You need to follow. I need you to come up,
Okay.
and then you need to state your name and address.
Mike Boucher, 16 Hillside Avenue, Groton.
Okay. What's your question?
Sorry I missed your early part of the presentation. I was just wondering if you could give us any examples of successful TIF programs in the area, or Connecticut possibly, and even better, this population size or city size. That's my only question and comment.
Microphone.
Is that okay?
Mhm.
Thanks. And that's what I missed. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, as I had mentioned before, and what I didn't mention is that the TIF legislation has been around for many years, but the original was very poorly crafted and was not a useful tool. But there had been several changes that was recently adopted over the last 2 years. So there are several communities that are now actively have them. So the track record over the long term in Connecticut is not as lengthy as all the other states. I don't have other specifics on other states, but the one that was brought to my attention this morning was Windsor, where they were actually the first in the state to adopt about 2 years ago, year and a half ago, and they were able to attract a developer to convert a 250,000 square foot vacant contaminated mill building next to the Hartford rail line, and now converted into 160 units. We don't have that many mill buildings like that around, but it's a good example. And you can see the scale of other communities that, from smaller rural towns like Suffield to urban settings like New Britain, that are taking advantage of this.
Councilor Depot.
I just wanted to add, I think when the consultants, when we originally had the presentation on this, one of the consultants was from New Hampshire, or Vermont. He had been and helped, so he had a lot of experience in one, I can't remember which one it was, but he had experience in one of those states where it was very successful, and I think we had asked them questions about that. So that's where we kind of drew our examples from, because he had had experience, because they had been doing it obviously longer, since Connecticut's only been doing it.
Camoy and Associates is our consultant that's been working with the town and city, and they drafted the policy here based upon, they've got a lot of experience in doing TIF policy. So.
Councilor Rusk.
Mike, there's information in the front too, on the table,
Oh, okay,
if you want more information.
Is that just different than what's available on the web, or,
It's our policy. I don't know if our policy is on the web.
or your personal policy? Or city department policy? Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments from the council? Okay, on that, I'll take a motion for adjournment.
I move we adjourn.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstention, motion carries unanimously. We are adjourned.